Hello, and in this episode, I want to share with you another fascinating book by a leading scholar that draws some amazing parallels between Islam, the teachings of Islam, and the very earliest Christian movement in the first century. And I just want to share with you this book called The Jesus Dynasty by James D. Tabor, who is professor at the Department of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, USA. He has featured on the BBC and Channel 4 and the History Channel and the Discovery Channel, and he's a high-profile biblical archaeologist as well as a New Testament scholar. And he argues in this book that far from setting himself up as the chosen Messiah of a new world religion, Jesus saw himself as a descendant of the royal house of David and head of an apocalyptic movement aimed at establishing a ruling dynasty in Israel. This would be led by Jesus' own family, especially at the beginning his brother James, who did indeed become the head of the church in Jerusalem, appointed by the apostles. And they would lead the Jewish people in political, social and spiritual redemption. Now, this, of course, is quite different from the Christianity that we know today. And so he explores what happened, where Jesus' family were basically written out from the Bible. But in fact, historically, we can show that they played a really central role, particularly in the first 2 centuries, in the Jewish wing of the church, before it was obliterated by Paul's own understanding in the emerging Catholic Church in the 2nd, 3rd and 4th centuries. So I just wanted to share with you the conclusion, where he talks about the similarities between what he has uncovered and Islamic teaching. And what he says is quite remarkable. So Professor Tabor says on page 287, Muslims do not worship Jesus, who is known as Isa in Arabic, nor do they consider him divine, but they do believe that he was a prophet or messenger of God, and he is called the Messiah in the Qur'an. However, by affirming Jesus as Messiah, they are attesting to his messianic message, not his mission as a heavenly Christ. There are some rather striking connections between the research I presented in the Jesus Dynasty, which is his book, and the traditional beliefs of Islam. The Muslim emphasis on Jesus as messianic prophet and teacher is quite parallel to what we find in the Q source, in the book of James, and in the Didache. Just briefly explain, by the way, the Q source, Q stands for quell, which is a German word meaning source. And this is a technical term in New Testament scholarship which refers to the material that the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke share in common, and that they both drew on. So they drew on a source, unknown who produced it, but clearly it's evident. You can see passages in both Gospels where the Greek is the same. And this might have been a written document, it might have been an oral narration where we don't know, or maybe both. So Matthew, for example, uses Mark's Gospel as a source. He uses Q, this other source, plus his own material. Luke uses Mark as a source, plus Q, of course, plus his own unique material. So the book of James he also refers to, that's not really a book, it's a letter towards the end of the New Testament, which you can read, it's quite short, where James talks very positively about following the law and the perfect law that gives freedom. This is the Torah. And also how Abraham was justified by his works and not by his faith. It's the opposite of what Paul teaches in Galatians and Romans and so on. So it's a very interesting letter. And also he refers to this word, the Didache. Didache is a Greek word meaning teaching in Greek, and it refers to a document that scholars aren't quite sure when it was written, possibly as early as AD 50 or as late as the 2nd century, but it presents a very different understanding of Christianity from Paul. It's a Jewish faith. The Lord's Supper is not about the body and blood of Jesus. Jesus is a human figure, a prophet, a Messiah. So that's a fascinating text that was only rediscovered in the 19th century. It was known in the early church and disappeared from view for nearly 2,000 years and was rediscovered, and that caused quite a sensation in the Victorian era. So Professor Tabor continues, to be the Messiah is to proclaim a message, but it is the same message as that proclaimed by Abraham, Moses and all the prophets. Islam insists that neither Jesus nor Muhammad brought a new religion. Both sought to call people back to what might be called Abrahamic faith. This is precisely what we find emphasized in the book of James. There's no new religion, Christianity, in the letter of James. It's old-time Judaism, although obviously Jesus is a prophet and a Messiah. Like Islam, the book of James and the teaching of Jesus in Q emphasize doing the will of God as a demonstration of one's faith. Judaism, much like Islam, is not terribly preoccupied with believing a whole set of dogmas. It's very much emphasized on doing the will of God, on practice, on prayer, on the 5 pillars. Or one of them is belief, but a lot of it is on charity, on actions, rather than endless believing in doctrines and dogmas and creeds. Also, he says, the dietary laws of Islam, as quoted in the Qur'an, echo the teaching of James in Acts chapter 15, almost word for word. Quote, abstain from swine flesh, blood, things offered to idols, and carrion. And that's compared with the Qur'an chapter 2, verse 172. Since Muslims reject all of the Pauline affirmations about Jesus, and thus the central claims of Orthodox Christianity, the gulf between Islam and Christianity on Jesus is a wide one. However, there is little about the view of Jesus presented in this book that conflicts with Islam's basic perception. Prophet Muhammad was in contact with Christian groups in Arabia, and there is evidence to suppose that the Christians he might have met might have been closer in their beliefs to the Ebionites than to the Western Church. Now, the Ebionites, this comes from a word in Hebrew meaning the poor, were a group of Jewish Christians whose beliefs are virtually identical to Islamic beliefs. Yes, they believed Jesus was the Messiah and a prophet, but no, he was not God or divine in any sense. Yes, he was born of the Virgin Mary. No, Jesus didn't abolish the law. The halakha, or the sharia, if you like, of Judaism is still to be followed. And these people, these Ebionites, I say, were a Jewish group, a Jewish sect. They basically died out sometime later in the 2nd century, overwhelmed by the Gentile Christianity of the Catholic Church, of Paul's own understanding of salvation, which was quite different. So Professor Tabor says, if that be the case, then one of the most fascinating turns of history would be that the view of Jesus, represented by the Jesus Dynasty, has survived, ironically, in aspects of Islam or Islamic tradition as well. So again, this is a theme which I've come across again and again. In another book which I shared a few days ago, The Brother of Jesus and the Lost Teachings of Christianity by Professor Butts, he also makes that point. And also in that great Catholic work, The New Jerusalem Bible Commentary, an official publication of the Catholic Church, which also mentions that the Jewish Christianity died out in the 1st century to be reborn as Islam in the 7th century. They draw this direct connection between the earliest Christianity and Islam. So this keeps on cropping up, and these are serious academics. One of them is a Lutheran minister. The Catholic publication obviously is Roman Catholic. This guy, I think, is probably more Unitarian in his outlook. So I just wanted to share with you the extraordinary parallels that people are making between the earliest faith of the disciples. And if there's one point I just wanted to stress, really, to get one's head around what's really at the root issue here, and this has been pointed out by scholars since the 19th century. It's nothing new that I've discovered, but it's a very important point that Jesus proclaimed, according to our earlier sources, Jesus proclaimed a message about the coming of the kingdom, about God's mercy, about sincerity, about having a pure intention, about obeying the Jewish law, the Torah, with a renewed intensity and an emphasis on love and mercy and faith, although not neglecting the other aspects of the law. And people were entered into this renewed, is it like a renewal movement within Judaism? Contrast that with this gospel of Jesus, which according to our sources, Jesus preached in Mark chapter 1. He refers to this message that Jesus preached, to the later message of Paul and his followers, which was a gospel about Jesus. They didn't proclaim the same message as Jesus. They proclaimed Jesus himself as the message, as the content, as a man who died and risen again from the dead and was now sitting at the right hand of God. And faith in him brings salvation, both in this life and in the life to come. And this is a very different religion, and I really do maintain that these are two different religions. The religion of Jesus, the gospel of Jesus, versus the religion about Jesus, the gospel about Jesus. They're two different gospels. And that is a striking finding of New Testament scholarship, and is probably the dominant view of most scholars since the 19th century. Not all scholars would agree with that, but the very conservative scholars, represented by people like Tom Wright and Craig Blomberg and many others, evangelicals, would disagree with that very strongly, of course. But I think more objective historians do see a fundamental difference between those two. The proclaimer became the one proclaimed. Jesus preached the kingdom, and it was the church that came. And these are discontinuities that really expose the realities of Christianity. Now, this is all very controversial, of course, and most Christians are not aware of these things. But I just wanted to share with you, of these two books, both by American academics, I would go with this one, Jeffrey Butt's. It's slightly more mainstream. It's better annotated. It quotes more scholarly sources and is less dependent on speculation. But I think Tabor does make some very interesting points about Jesus' family, a bit like a Shia dynasty. So there we go. Until next time.